grew up down the street from who was it? The golf guy who?
Gary Adams, the inventor of the tailor-made golf clubs.
And so you live down the street from that particular guy, and his dad was a golf pro, or he
He
was
was
a
a
golf
pro at
pro.
the country club where I caddied. His mother was my Spanish teacher,
Oh,
and
that's neat.
his little brother was a friend. Gary was a couple years older than I was.
It's interesting to talk to people and find out how they're all. It seems like we're always connected in with people that are, I don't know, famous or infamous, or it's just wild how we all have a story about this, that, or the other. Um, that you were close to. Did so? Were you a good golfer? Did you
Oh
enjoy
heck no,
caddying as a young man?
nope. My my two favorite caddy jobs were I caddied for Gabby Hartnett one day. Gabby was a former Chicago Cubs catcher who was in the Hall of Fame, and I don't know the name of the other guy I caddied for, who was $10 for a round plus $100 tip. I found out later that his daddy was the Godfather for Chicago. So,
Oh wow! Oh wow! So I'm here with Chief Warrant Officer for Jim. Is it Doran or
yep,
Duran? How do you say your
Doran,
last name?
Doran.
Doran. That's a neat thing to be a warrant officer in the Navy. Were you part of the aviation in the Navy? Tell me
Yeah,
about.
I was
I
an
saw a
aviation.
shirt with gunner on it.
I was an aviation ordnance.
So what
Now,
does that mean? Tell me about that. Tell me what an
to
aviation
start with,
ordnanceman
your
is
buddy
about.
Andy Hefty, I worked for his dad. Andy was only about 7. Um,
Oh wow, really?
yeah, and I called his dad one day. He had a skinny teenage kid that I used to pick on all the time. And I called his dad up one day after we both retired. And I said, "Hey, Bill, I just heard through the grapevine that Tommy turned down the job of Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy to retire." And he says, "Yeah." I says, "Are we that darn old?" He says, "You are. I'm a lot older than that."
Oh wow, that's great, right? It's isn't it neat to see people's success around us
Oh, yeah.
and to watch others grow and come behind us. Who were the folks that you looked up to as a youngster?
Define youngster.
You define it.
In high school, just my buddies and some of their folks and my folks, of course.
Oh really?
Although I would never let them know it at the time. But
Right? Isn't it kind of you have to keep it to yourself, right? That you
yeah,
at some
when
point
you're
you think your
14 and
parents are
15, you don't want your folks to know you really like them.
yeah, right? So where did you grow up? Where were you from?
McHenry, Illinois, 12 miles south of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, 35 miles west of Great Lakes Naval Base.
What was it like to grow up there? What would you describe it as? I grew up,
It was a small
in
town,
that area.
3,600 people when I left to join the Navy. Um, and I actually started out in a village outside of town. A village only has like 600 people in it today. But everybody knew everybody else's business. There was no private telephone. We all had party lines. You pick up and listen to whoever was talking. We didn't lock doors. A lot of the streets were gravel. It was fun. Um, no cell phones. Not very many color television sets. Stick shift automobiles. Playing in the hay lofts of the various farms around the area. water skiing in the river, chasing girls and catching them and not knowing why.
Hey, yeah, right. It's like I caught you. Now what do I do with you?
Pretty much, yeah. Like a
what?
forerunner being
I,
70.
there you go. There you go. There you go. If you had to like look back on those days and think of them, as like as heaven on earth, those growing up days, would you say that there was way more good times than bad, or
Oh yeah.
was it kind of rough back then?
Yep. It was both. There was more good times than bad. Um, you couldn't get away with as much as these kids can today. And if you got paddled at the school, and they tell your mother, and you get paddled again when you get home. And my woodshop teacher even made my mom her own paddle so she wouldn't keep breaking her wooden spoons on me.
They were conspiring to keep your butt whooped, huh?
Well, my mother was president of the PTA.
Oh wow! So your parents were very involved in what was going
Just
on in
mom.
your
Just mom.
life.
Dad was a trucker.
Oh really? So
Yep.
dad was on the road?
No, he was a local. He drove semis around northern Illinois and Indiana, Iowa. You asked a question earlier
And
about what I did in the Navy, and we
yeah.
skipped around it. I was an aviation ordnanceman. Basically, we maintain all the air-launched munitions in the fleet, um, putting them together, loading them, downloading them, arming them, de-arming them, maintaining the systems in the aircraft that operate them. We found out, I guess probably in the late 60s, that for our what we call NEC, Navy Enlisted Classification Code, the Air Force had 5 different MOSs to handle what we did with one. But I did nukes, bombs, guns, small arms, missiles, rockets, plus the aircraft systems. And it was a fun life. People think the flight deck, well, no, they're right. The flight deck is probably one of the most dangerous places in the world. Um, I've only been hurt up there a few times, but it's an adrenaline high. You really love it.
So you were like the bomb expert on the ship at the
No,
end of
no,
your
but
career, right? You were the guy.
I worked in a squadron ordnance shop as a teenager. There was like 25 of us, and when I went to shore duty, I ended up as a nuclear weapons instructor on the West Coast. And from there, I went to be a nuclear weapons instructor on the East Coast. And from there, the Navy screwed up. They sent me from knowing everything that there is to know about air-launched nuclear munitions. They sent me to the Mekong Delta. And that's supposed to be a no-no. But the detailer asked me where I wanted to go, and I told him, and he didn't question it, and I went.
So tell me more about that. Explain that to me more.
Explain which.
So the last thing that you were going to get stationed somewhere, and you end up stationed in the Mekong Delta.
Well,
that you're talking about Vietnam.
I did what we call termination of shore duty. I was an E6, and I hadn't been to sea since I was an E4, and there was no getting promoted beyond where I was if I didn't get some what we call haze, gray, and underway time. So when I talked to my detailer, the guy that writes our orders, he said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "Well, what do you got?" He said, "USS Ticonderoga." And I said, "No, I've been there, done that." He says, "Chu Lai, Republic of Vietnam." I said, "Okay." And he said, "Helicopter Attack Light Squadron 3 in the Mekong Delta." I said, "Well, if you're going to send me to Vietnam, I want flight pay." So I went to the helicopter squadron. stayed there for 6 months and made warrant. And the Navy has a rule that enlisted man becoming an officer is immediately transferred. And so I went from there to warrant officer school to a ship and immediately deployed right back to Vietnam. I was home with my wife and kids 3 weeks in 18 months.
Oh man. So what was it like to, to be over there in Vietnam when you were there? What were you doing in Vietnam?
I was supervisor of the squadron ordnance shop. I was the squadron armorer for all intents and purposes, and I flew as a crew chief in our slicks, not in the gunships. The only time I ever flew in a gunship is we were ferrying one out to a detachment. But I flew logistics missions mostly. Fresh water to Arvin Outpost in the Human Forest, mail to the Australian and Coast Guard ships off the coast, Admiral and his staff around the Delta checking on stuff. But as soon as we got tasks, our slicks always also flew the SEAL infiltrations and exfiltrations. And when those missions were tasked, they normally replaced us with guys off the gunship detachments. The experienced door gunners who were flying combat every day. No. I flew a lot, but not as much as I would have liked. When the warrant officer list came out, my commanding officer took me off of flight pay.
That's the only thing you wanted. You wanted to be on flight pay, come on.
Well, it's tax free.
So like, I don't even know how to ask the question about the bombs. Like your whole job and life was a caretaker of unexploded yet bombs that, if they were just done just right, could blow up at any minute.
Well, no,
what's that like?
They weren't that dangerous. We were well trained. We knew what we were doing. The bombs would come up from magazines in the ship with the fins on them, and that's all, just the fins and a fuse well. We would manually lift 250 and 500-pound bombs 4 feet to put them on the bomb rack. We'd manually lift 1,000-pound bombs, maybe 2.5 feet, 3 feet, put them in the bomb rack. And then we'd attach the fuses and put in what we call an arming wire, which when the pilot drops the bomb, the arming wire stays with the bomb rack. But in the meantime, it's inserted in a hole in the fuse to keep the vanes from turning. The fuse doesn't arm until it's released. All that bomb lifting, I was 18, 19, 20 at the time. Now I'm 76, and in 2 weeks from tomorrow, I'm having my right shoulder replaced. Thank you to bomb lifting.
It's an interesting thing what we put our bodies through when we're young and the prices that we pay for it over time. We also, at the time, you didn't know a whole lot better, and you weren't like there wasn't the attitude of working out every day. No,
none of us did. Little funny story. I'm always trying to lose weight. And my roommate in USS Constellation was a skinny West Texan. And he was trying to gain weight. And one day I woke up and I said, wait a minute, all aircraft carriers have a small gym. Not much bigger than 500 square feet, maybe. But we'd go to the gym in the morning and work out, and we would do all the same things. And I said, see, you're trying to gain weight, and I'm trying to lose weight. We're doing all the same stuff. He says, yep. I said, I quit.
What was it like to, I've read some of your stories, people that went to captain's mast and you stood
Yeah,
in for them, and
Article
different
15.
stories you've written. Oh yeah, yeah. It's an interesting thing. Tell me some of the things that happened to you. Tell me about did you get in trouble as a youngster? Did you go to captain's mast?
Who, me? Not
Yeah.
me. I was the perfect little boy. Uh, yeah, I didn't go to captain's mast as often as I should have, but I went once as an E4. Um, Seems they took offense to me borrowing a shipmate's car and going to San Francisco to see my girlfriend when I was supposed to be on the base in the duty section. And that cost me 30 days restricted to the base. I had just made E4, so the CO said, if you were me, what would you do? I said, Skipper, I'd restrict me, but I wouldn't bust me. And that's what he did. He didn't bust me. Next one I should have gone, there was a bunch of us on Liberty together in Japan. And I don't know what happened or how it started, but somebody kept playing the same song in the jukebox over and over and over. So we grabbed the jukebox and threw it out in the alley. And the Japanese bar staff decided to go do kamikaze on us. At one point, I thought my buddy was going to choke to death because the shore patrol had him by one end of his neckerchief and the Japanese police by the other end, and they were taking him in two different directions. There were 6 of us, as I recall, and we were on our way back to the States. This was our last Asian port call before we went home. And my squadron commander investigated those, what we call report chits, discrepancy reports, disciplinary reports, until we got back to San Diego and offloaded from the ship, and we were no longer under the ship's control. A buddy of mine, who's still a buddy of mine, he retired as an E7, he ended up taking a swing at one of the Japanese guys he had pinned up against the wall. The Japanese guy moved his head, Ed broke his fist, and ended up in the Naval Hospital while we went home. Well, the CEO of the Naval Hospital in Yokosuka did do an NJP on Ed. He was the only one of the 6 of us that got punished.
Ouch.
Other than the other 5 of us had to pay for the damages to the bar and the jukebox and stuff. And then I had one as a CW03 in the Mediterranean that had me removed from a promotion list, as a matter of fact. I was the #1 guy on the promotion list that year and ended up not getting promoted.
Oh wow.
That was alcohol related.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the thing in our culture and the younger culture for sure. Before the DUI culture came up, alcohol was like if you weren't working, you were drinking, and
Yep.
that was almost like the way it was. Right? It was just what else to do.
Military commands. I can't speak for the Army, but in the Navy, we had squadron beer busts on a regular basis throughout my entire career. And then 10 years after I retired,
there's a lot of bonds.
Hmm?
There's a lot of bonds that are made over alcohol. There's a lot of bonds that are made over alcohol. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, I was saying 10 years after I retired, you get a DUI, you're on your way out the door with a general discharge. And I never had a DUI. Came close twice.
Amen. Amen. You said that that you have like a hobby of computer games. Tell me about that.
I haven't played any games on either of my gaming machines in over a year. Because I got sidetracked into doing genealogy research. And I have built up my family tree program with approximately 30,000 relatives going back 50, 55 generations. And that is really time consuming. I'm 2, 3 hours every morning. First thing when I get up, grab my coffee and sit down in front of this machine and start digging and have lunch and then go do the rest of the stuff I've got to do during the day.
That sounds like my dad, right? My dad's done the exact same thing. He used Family Tree Maker,
Yeah,
and
that's the program
I
I
tell
use.
him, yeah, I tell him that when he starts going to these cemeteries with a shovel, starts digging people up, we got a problem. But it's up until now, he's just been taking pictures, and I tell you, you and him might find a lot of common ground there. My father has taken his ancestry way back,
Well,
and it's
I
really
told my
neat.
daughter, I told my daughter one time, I says, you know, your great times 34 grandfather was the Emperor Charlemagne. And she got all excited. And I says, calm down. There's 50 million other European people in this planet who's also his 34th great grandchild. So, if you look at the numbers, when you're talking grandparents, you get 4 grandparents, 8 great grandparents, and they just double. So at the 34 great grandparent level, there is about 2 billion great grandparents at that level. And the planet only had 200 million people on it at that point in history. So there's a lot of loops in everybody's family tree, and I find more of them every single day.
Yeah, my dad uncovered a lot of secrets and a lot of things that were confusing until he dug through it, and some family things and different stuff. Did you find anything that was scandalous?
Oh, yeah. I have a cousin that during World War II, Roosevelt had him put in prison because he was a fascist. And he was from Iowa, I think. His goal, he was the founder of what they called at the time the Silver Shirts. And his goal was to overthrow FDR and take over as Emperor of the United States. But he did about 10 years in a federal pen for actually what they got him on. He was also a stockbroker. And what they got him on was SEC violations and stock fraud. And there was another one I thought was kind of funny. Oh, when my mom hooked me into this genealogy thing, because I've always loved military history, and she told me that we had an uncle at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And so I started playing with that. And it took me 3 years, and I called her up one day and I said, Mom, I found him. She says, good. I said, it would have been easier if you'd have told me he was a redcoat. But he was a lieutenant in the British Army.
Oh wow!
But his
Oh,
2 nephews, who were my great grandfathers, were both at that same battle on the other side of the fence. And during the Civil
oh,
War, I have a cousin who was a Medal of Honor recipient, and he was a black man. His father had 3 boys with a slave woman. His father was from Louisiana. And in the 1850s, he gave all 3 of the boys their freedom papers and sent them to Ohio to get an education. And when the war started out, they joined the U.S. colored troops, and their dad joined the Confederate Army. And so
oh
they
wow!
fought in the same battles on opposite sides from each other, up and down the Louisiana, Alabama area. I think his dad was killed in Texas, and all the brothers survived. Um, but the guy that got the Medal of Honor, all the officers in his regiment were killed, and that's when you had black soldiers and white officers. And he was a company first sergeant, and the battalion commander made him acting sergeant major, and he took command of the regiment. I'm sorry, not the battalion commander, the brigade commander. But it was only for the one battle, and they refilled all the white officer slots and took him back down to his first sergeant's job. I had two distant cousins who were carrier skippers in World War II, and they both had the same thing. Japanese sunk the ship out from under them, each of them. One of them retired as a three-star admiral before the Korean War, and one of them was chief of naval operations during the Korean War. You ever heard that myth that we don't need to have elections anymore because the same family has been running this country since 1600?
Tell me about it.
My family tree has 11 men in it who are blood relatives who were also presidents of the United States. Has 10 more presidents of the United States who were in-laws, plus two more. One was the president of the Confederate States, and the other was the president of the Republic of Hawaii before we annexed them. And I mean, they weren't like first or second cousins. I think the closest one was George Bush, and he's an eighth cousin or something. I know FDR was an eighth cousin. But having Nixon and FDR in the same family trees sounds a little preposterous.
It's interesting, like you were talking about how it fans out and it does get so large and it can be so inclusive. One of the things that my father has done is a Y-DNA testing. Have you done any of that DNA stuff?
Only for myself and my late dog. And I had a lab for 11 and a half years. He passed away last spring. So
Isn't it neat to look at the lineage of your animals? Like my daughter does that. She has a breed that she's very involved with, and she does some of that genealogy work with her animals. Was it neat to look at the genealogy of your dog?
well, I think the company that did it was just getting started, but for about 3 years, I was getting regular emails from them adding, neighborhood dogs to my dog's family list. It ended up, I mean, he looked like a lab, he behaved like a lab, he was built like a lab, but he was 40% Chow Chow. And he had some Husky and Pit Bull and some other stuff in it. He was only 14% lab, but the lab genes seemed to take over the body as he was developing in the womb. He was born as the run of the litter and ended up as the biggest dog in the litter.
So, what was your favorite time or station, place of duty in the Navy? What was it?
My, my
Was it on a
last
particular ship?
my last three, um, Fighter Squadron 14 aboard the USS John F. Kennedy. Uh, from there, I went to NAS Norfolk as the assistant weapons officer. And from there, I went to Fighter Squadron 142 aboard the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. And, the other squadrons were great, but these three duty stations were simply outstanding. As we like to say, he's got all his stuff in one bag, but he forgot where he put the bag. The two air wings that I served in for my last two at-sea tours, every squadron in the air wing had all their stuff in one bag. The air wing had it all in one bag. The captain of the ship had it all in one bag, and everybody knew where it was. I never saw two aircraft carrier air wing crews, combination crews, work together so professionally in a peacetime environment. I mean, it was just amazing.
What's it like to stand next to a nuclear bomb?
Boring. You can't touch it unless somebody's reading a checklist and telling you what to do. It doesn't go anywhere without a Marine. There's a story I was going to tell, but I don't know if it's been declassified yet, so I'll just leave that alone. Um, but I watched them offloading the nukes from a carrier in Hawaii. I was on the flight deck, and the cable for the crane broke, and the bomb dropped about 110 feet onto the barge they were offloading them onto. And when I saw that cable snap, I started running up the flight deck to get as far away from that thing as I could. And I got about 10 steps away, and I stopped. I said, "You can't run far enough, fast enough. I said, let's go back and watch." So I watched. The bomb was total, but the safety features in them are remarkable. Just totally remarkable. You cannot inadvertently detonate an American-made nuclear weapon.
It's just wild. Was there any disaster that you were a part of that was there a fire, or did you get attacked, or did y'all have some type of natural accident, or were you at heavy seas and got knocked overboard or anything?
I spent some time in a tower on a base in Vietnam with an M14 and a Starlight scope, having a discussion with the VC sniper over who was the better shot. I did that twice.
Wow.
And the 05 that sent me up in the tower to do that got all upset when I said, "Aye, aye, Mr. Calley." You remember Lieutenant Calley from the Army, the My Lai massacre?
Yeah.
That was interesting. And
so tell me about that.
I got hurt when an F-14 broke the four-wire when they were landing on the ship. Resting gear cable snapped. Pilot and Rio bailed out. I got hit by a flight deck fire truck and took my legs out from under me. Couldn't get up. Airplane was flying a perfect loop and looked like it was going to come right back down on the ship. And so I just rolled over on my back to watch it. I mean, there was nothing I could do. Like, roll over was the best I could do. And at the very last second, the officer of the deck up on the bridge had him throw the wheel hard to port, and the airplane crashed about 50 yards off the starboard side of the ship.
Oh, wow.
And on the Kennedy, I got blown down by an A7 into the side of a taxiing F-14. I hit it head first hard enough that my fiberglass helmet shattered. And the only thing that held it on was my microphone cables. Both of those two episodes resulted in me taking a trip to sick bay in a Stoke stretcher.
What's it like to be like hurt on the ship? Like on the ship, if everybody's got their duties and everybody's got a thing to do, if you're hurt suddenly and you can't perform your duties, not only are you hurt, but now you're like held captive and you can't go anywhere, do anything with crutches in a ship. It's hard to move around as a kid, right?
I did. I lived
right?
I lived on the third deck of the Kennedy. No, Eisenhower. And the ready room was, the third deck is 2 decks below the hangar. And our squadron ready room was in the deck right below the flight deck. And I had sprained an ankle at a picnic in Naples playing softball with the squadron. And my leg was casted. and I used crutches to get around on the ship for 6 weeks. But no, that was the Kennedy. It was the Kennedy. I'm trying to remember. I'm going by roommate. On the Eisenhower, I had a warrant officer roommate. On the Kennedy, I had a flight surgeon. But the skipper of the ship also has an elevator that goes from the main deck where his import cabin is to the bridge. And there's only 2 guys that have keys, him and the executive officer. And when the admiral staff comes aboard, the admiral and his chief of staff have keys. Captain gave me a key, so I could ride it from the main deck to the we call the 03 level, and just hobble down the passageway to my ready room. Stand the duty officer every day for 6 weeks. I should preface this, we had a fully equipped hospital on board. Maybe 20 beds, 11 doctors, 35 corpsmen, 3 or 4 dentists, and another 10 or 15 dental technicians. So it wasn't like we were without medical help. And when I was a kid, I fractured my elbow on the flight deck, and they strapped me into an airplane and sent me to the Naval Hospital in the Philippines. Flew me off the ship on a catapult launch.
Oh, wow.
That hurt. Because you're facing aft, arms in a sling. When the catapult fires, you've never had one before, you're leaning back in the seat, because that's what the pilots do. Well, pilots are facing frontwards, you're facing backwards. So you lean back in the seat, the catapult fires, you go flying forward, your arm goes out and wraps the seat in front of you, and then you cry all the way to the Philippines.
So twice now you have said when I was a kid versus
under
when
20
you were
years
an
old.
adult. That's what you're saying. So when you came in the Army, like as a
matter of fact, I joined the Navy the day before my 17th birthday, because my birthday was Saturday. So I joined on Friday. Monday I was sworn in, and I was in boot camp on Monday afternoon. So I was basically 17 years, 2 days old.
You went to the Navy. What year was this?
1963.
Oh, wow.
My congressman was Donald Rumsfeld.
No way. Really?
Yep. And my mother was
awesome.
a minor muckety-muck in the Republican Party in Northern Illinois. She knew Rumsfeld rather well. And funny story I got to tell you about Mom. Mom was in the Navy in World War II. And I had to go to a POW MIA ceremony at the Pentagon in 2004, 2005. I was working for a veteran service organization at the time. And my mom was visiting us from Illinois. And I asked if she wanted to go with me. She said, sure. So I took her to the Pentagon. Before we left the house, she called Rumsfeld and made an appointment to see him. Well, we're down at the ceremony, and some Army colonel comes down looking for her and tells her that the secretary is sorry, but the president called him and he was on his way to the White House. So I figured, being a dutiful young son, that I would introduce my mother to the Vice Chief of Naval Operations and let him entertain her with stories of running the Navy. So when I introduced him, she immediately said, I was in the Navy in World War II. He says, what did you do? And she says, I was a yeoman on Ernie King's staff. King was his Chief of Naval Operations in World War II. And he was probably one of the most hard-headed, hard-nosed officers in the Navy at that point in history. They disappeared for an hour while Mom entertained him with Ernie King stories.
Amen.
Yeah, she was a trip.
Part of this, what we're trying to do is to capture some of these stories and some of these memories, for those that come behind. I think you said you told your kids or somebody that would be watching, to take a moment and brag about your family if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's see. One brother was in the Navy as a Cold War vet. Another brother was an Air Force vet, and he and I were in Vietnam at the same time. Uh, my mom and stepfather were both in the Navy in World War II. My father was an infantryman in the 41st Infantry Division. Matter of fact, his battalion commander was Teddy Roosevelt's middle son, Archie. Um, my grandfather chased Pancho Villa around Texas during the Mexican Border Rebellion. I had a great grandfather in the Civil War, two more in the Revolutionary War. So, you're saying there was former force. Um, I've had somebody in my direct family line has fought in every battle, every war rather, that this country has been involved in since 1676.
Wow.
We haven't missed one yet. So that's too bad, but that's the way life is.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that believe that the part of life is war, and that's just the way it is, and it can't be helped. And it's an interesting kind of think about as you look back on, your time and your willingness to give your life for your country in the defense of your fellow countrymen and women. What was it like to kind of look back on that sacrifice in those times of danger and times of, what did you call it, like gray times, or away from shore or something? There was a saying you said
Haze,
early on.
gray,
I
and
thought it was
underway.
neat. Yeah, exactly, right. And
Haze,
I mean,
gray
I
is what
get
the
it.
ships are painted.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it was fun. I enjoyed it. I'd go back and do it again in a minute. I kind of wish I hadn't retired when I did. I could have done another 10 or 15 years and done 35 or 40 if I'd thought about it seriously enough. But I miss it a lot. The camaraderie, you know, my best friend and I met in 1963. Our first wives were cousins. Uh, we were in two training commands together. In both cases, he was a month or so ahead of me in training. We were in the same squadron during our first fleet tour. During my first shore tour, I was a nuclear weapons instructor, and Carl was an ordnanceman at Barbers Point Naval Air Station in Hawaii. And they sent him back to Central California to go through the classes I taught 2 years in a row. We were on the same base in different squadrons in Vietnam together. And when I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast in 1974, I didn't see him again until 2013. But we communicated regularly, letters, emails, Facebook, telephone calls. Um, we both retired as CW04s. We were both in F-14s, me on the East Coast and him on the West Coast. And when I saw him in 2013, we were at a reunion in Reno. It was like it was 1975 that I just seen him last year in San Diego, you know. In fact, he was having breakfast with his wife. And we've both porked out a little bit since our younger days. And he didn't quite recognize me when I sat down in his booth and started taking the bacon off his plate and eating it. And as soon as I put the first one in my mouth, that's when it hit, when the Jim. And then another one, a guy that told earlier, busted his fist in a fist fight in Japan. He retired as a chief petty officer in E7, went to work for the Navy as a civil servant in the ordnance career. So he did 20 years in the Navy and 30 years as a civil servant, 50 years as an aviation ordnanceman. I'm in contact with him regularly. I haven't seen him in 3 or 4 or 5 years, but we're on Facebook 3 or 4 or 5 times a week. But they're all starting to die off, Will. Right now, to the best of my knowledge, out of the original 25 guys in that ordnance shop, there's 6 of us left. But there's still 3.
Well, that's what. Yeah, so that's part of what I'm doing this about. You know, this is why I'm doing this. You know, tell me a little bit about. You know, in the Army, we have a saying, there's no such thing as an atheist in the foxhole. Tell me about your spirituality. What kept you going on those long night watches and times when you were away from family? Was there
cigarettes and coffee and hard
spiritual
work.
mantra? Amen. Hey, I get it, right? Yeah.
Spirituality had nothing to do with it. I didn't really find the Lord until I found my 3rd wife. And that was, 28 years ago. Been that long already? Yep, 28 years ago, last month. And we both fell out of love with organized religions and organized churches. I mean, if I want to go to God's house, I just walk outside and sit under a tree.
Amen. 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 So tell me about your legacy. Do you have children?
Oh yeah, I've got a son and a daughter, and my daughter has 3 daughters. When you grow up with 5 brothers and a sister, there's more than enough legacy to go around. My son is the associate athletic director for the University of Connecticut, and he is the head athletic director for the UConn basketball team. I said athletic, I'm sorry. Trainer, athletic trainer, not director. Yeah. And my daughter works in a organ recovery business, livers, lungs, things like that in Virginia Beach. She works in the quality assurance department. My son has never been married. My son-in-law is a vice principal of a Virginia Beach high school. I've got 1 daughter in high school in Virginia Beach, granddaughter, another granddaughter in college in Lynchburg, Virginia. Well, actually Farmville, Virginia. And my oldest granddaughter graduated from Arizona State last May. And she's still out in Phoenix.
So what do you want to be when you grow up?
Fireman. I had 2 great careers. I had 3 careers. 2 were great. Did 21 years in the Navy, loving 99% of it. My second career was in financial services. I wasn't so much in love with that. It was fun when I started in it, but it got old in a very short period of time. But then I fell into the veteran service officer role. Did 4.5 years in Northern Illinois as the superintendent of a county veterans assistance commission, was basically the CEO of a small government agency that reported only to the veterans community in the county. County government had to fund us and house us, but we didn't work for them. We worked for the veterans. I worked for a commission that was appointed. 2 members of the commission were appointed from each veterans post in the county. From there, I went to AMVETS as the National Service Director. I was there for 4 years. Moved to West Virginia and spent 2.5 years as a non-paid volunteer service officer for Vietnam Veterans of America, and then 2.5 years with the West Virginia Department or Division of Veterans Affairs. 7 years as what they call a non-attorney practitioner. During my tenure, there was only 24 of us coast to coast. Not lawyers. None of us were lawyers. We had to do all the same continuing education that lawyers did. And we were all accredited to the bar of the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veteran Claims. And a couple of years on a VA advisory committee, a couple of years as secretary, and 2 more years as legislative chairman for the National Association of County Veteran Service Officers. And I just loved the heck out of it. Helping people who were my brothers and sisters, our brothers and sisters. It was just great, but you hear so many of these stories and they rub off, and the burnout rate in that field gets pretty high pretty fast. I don't know anybody who spent more than 2 years counseling veterans that doesn't have their own version of PTSD that came from the guys they were counseling. But my 2 best stories, I took over a case in West Virginia. The VA had denied it a couple of times. Guy got blown up in Vietnam. I mean, big time blown up. He was in the bomb dump doing an inventory or something when the VC mortared him. And the VA kept denying his claim. So I took it over. And I have been known to be similar to a bull in a china shop. And when all the dust and smoke settled down, this guy came in and said he wanted to kiss me. And I said, why? He says, my bank called me this morning and said the government deposited $400,000 in his checking account and he wanted to know if he should keep it. I said, bet your butt you should keep it. And I had another one back in Illinois, young lady. I went to high school with her older brother. She was a Navy corpsman. She went to San Diego to the Navy Hospital Corps School at the Balboa Naval Hospital. And when she finished the school, she stayed there for the rest of her enlistment. And long and short of it, she lost her marriage, she lost her job, she lost custody of her children, PTSD going through the overhead. She was living in Section 8 housing, where the government paid for most of her rent. And my agency paid for her utilities and her groceries. And she asked me if I'd reopen her claim, which had been denied by the VA on 2 previous occasions. And to reopen it, you got to have new evidence. Well, I got her to get a copy of her service record out of St. Louis. And I got her performance evaluations from the Naval Hospital. And that was my new evidence. And my counter argument to the VA was, yes, she never served in the combat zone. She only served at that Naval Hospital in San Diego. Who do you think unzipped the body bags when they got home? And that was all it took. She got 100% right from the get-go. Ended up using her back pay to buy her own little cottage and a car. And the last time I talked to her, she was drawing a little over $2,000 a month in non-taxable VA disability.
Amen. Amen. The a lot of times our airmen and sailors, Marines and soldiers need somebody to fight for them, somebody that understands the system, and so that's great that you're able to do that and to help these folks. It's got to be very rewarding for you, right?
Emotionally, yes. Financially, not so much. Veteran service officers at every level are some of the lowest paid people in the social services industry. Um, my folks, when I was working for AMVETS, and I had about 50 people spread out over 10 or 11 states, they were making less than $40,000 a year. As a county veteran service officer, I started out at 27.5, and as a state veteran service officer, I started out at 27. And if you're going to get into that field, you don't want to do it for the money because it's not there. Um, in Illinois, the Veterans Assistance Commission gets a piece of the property tax, and the percentage is set by the state legislature. But I had to tell our comptroller, I says, no, 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 no. The heck with the state legislature. You give me $1 million a year, which is what the state legislature says my budget should be, and you'll have me in jail for embezzlement in 2 years. There's no way I can use that much money. I only had 3 employees, 4 vehicles, and me. And my operating budget was about $400,000 a year. I didn't need the full $1 million. But then when I did need it, played hell getting it. And my deputy, who replaced me when I moved to Washington, he ended up threatening to take the county board to court. And they called the state's attorney down, and he said, Mike's right. If you don't give him the money, he's got no choice but to sue you under writ of mandamus. And that's the way the law's laid out. Things change. It's not like coming home from Vietnam and nobody wanting to know who you are.
Did you have that experience coming home from Vietnam?
No, personally, I did not. I was never spit on. I never had anybody throw paint or tomatoes or ketchup or any of that stuff at me. I got strange looks. First time I came home, I found out in the local saloon my money wasn't any good. And they never even asked me if I was 21 yet, which I wasn't.
What do you say? You found out your money wasn't good, that people were buying drinks for you?
You bet. I walked into a saloon in Northern Illinois in uniform with a Vietnam service medal on. I couldn't spend any money.
Right.
But that was in 65, 66.
As we look back on, the Vietnam War and Afghanistan and Iraq and the different things that have gone on, in our lifetimes that we've kind of seen, how do you think of your service in Vietnam, and how did it affect you? Was it a time of growth and learning, or was it Agent Orange and death? And you talk about being in a tower with a starlight scope.
I'd say growth and learning. Yeah, I've got a couple of Agent Orange related illnesses. But Agent Orange is not a sickness. It is not an illness. It just makes you susceptible to specific illnesses. A lot of people, it's Agent Orange, Agent Orange, Agent Orange. Agent Orange was just one of the rainbow defoliants. And the rainbow defoliants were named because each chemical mixture had a colored band painted around its 55-gallon drum. Agent Orange used an orange band. Agent Purple had a purple band. Agent Orange was the most heavily used. But it's just a cost of doing business. I once testified before Congress, and they asked how we could cut the VA expenses. And I said, it's very simple. Don't send our kids to war. Um, you know, we've got to have a military to defend ourselves, but we don't have to have a military to defend everybody else on the planet. Um, Trump was right when he made the NATO people start chipping in their fair share instead of us carrying the load. Um, but we send these kids off to combat, and technology in the long run hurts them more than it hurt us, because these kids have great helmets and great body armor, and guess what? They live. Our guys died, but they live without legs or without arms or without all four, because those parts aren't inside body armor. And my viewpoint is, if we send them there, then we damn sure need to support them when they come home. They don't all need it. They were talking about doing away with the VA disability rate at 10 and 20%. Kid that qualifies for a 10 or 20% disability payment, instead of giving him a monthly check, they were just going to give him a lump sum payment and call it square. To Congress, that sounded like a good deal. Up until I told them, I said, what you're going to have is a 20-year-old kid who's a homeless vet living in a brand new pickup truck, because that whole lump sum check is going to the Ford dealership or the Chevy dealership. You're also going to say he's got his entire disability benefits paid, which means what happens to his VA hospitalization? Does he still lose that, or get to use that? Because his benefits have been paid off. What happens when his situation gets worse? I'm 100% disabled. I didn't start out that way. I started out as 10% disabled. But as you age, minor body injuries you had in the service stop being minor. I talked about getting slammed into the F-14 that shattered my helmet. I have cervical spine osteoarthritis, which has morphed into cervical radiculopathy for my right arm, which basically over 25 years I've been drawing VA disability. My neck and shoulders have gone from being 20% disabled to 100% disabled. And that's in addition to all the other body parts that don't quite function. VA uses a different form of math than the rest of the world. Using normal math, I'm 240% disabled. Using VA math, I'm 100%. And basically what they do is, okay, I'm 100% able. That's what they say. You're 100% able. And you have a 60% disability. So you subtract that 60%, now you're 40% able. But now you've got a 40% disability. 40% of 40% is 16. So now you've got 76% disability using the VA math. Your ankle has 20%. 20% of 16, and and it just goes like downhill like that. And I don't dispute it. I don't really disagree with it, because if myself and every other veteran whose disabilities total up and over 100% were to get full payment for all of that, the Treasury Department couldn't print the money fast enough. I mean, the VA would go broke in 90 days. Excuse me. And there are some problems with the VA as well. Everybody complains about VA hospital care, but Veterans Health Administration. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the Veterans Health Administration. Those medical professionals do one hell of a job. They could do it better if we could fire all the bureaucrats, but we can't do that. Somebody's got to look good for the press. I
What was
You,
your nick? What was your nickname growing up?
Jim,
Oh yeah. What's your
and
full name?
in the Navy it was Gunner.
Gunner. Yeah, I saw you with a like a shirt on that said Air
Red
Gunner or something
shirt
like
that
that.
said Air Gunner on it. Yep.
Yeah, tell me about
Flight deck,
that.
ordnance officer. I was wearing a white helmet. Oh, I'm looking at the picture right here with a W1 cap device. We were going to underway replenish our ammunition stocks off the coast of Vietnam, and some of it is transferred by highline from the ammo ship to the hangar deck of the carrier, and others is flown from the ammo ship to the flight deck in a big cargo bag by helicopter. And my crew and I had to work the flight deck end of it. Guys in the white helmets are the safety observers. The guys in the red or the blue helmets are the worker bees. And that's where I was going. I was on my way up to the hangar deck to help supervise that evolution when my roommate took the picture.
Oh wow. It's wild how rare photographs are back in those days, right?
Well, we didn't have phones that took pictures. We didn't have phones that fit in your pocket either. My first cell phone was hardwired into the dashboard of my car. My second one was in a bag about the size of a small briefcase plugged into the cigarette lighter. And now I finally got my first smartphone 3 months ago. Mostly because I had an old flip phone
Oh,
that
watch
was
out.
perfect, and Verizon killed the 3G network, and that's what my flip phone worked on.
Wow. Wow. So have you found new games on your cell phone now that
I
you
don't
like to
play games
play?
on my cell phone. I text message my kids and my wife, um, and other than that, I use it for phone calls only. I think the only app I have on it that I use is I've got a Fit Watch, um, and it monitors my sleep, and I can go look on my cell phone, use the Fit Watch app on the cell phone. It'll tell me how many times I got up in the middle of the night to pee, how much deep sleep I had, how much light sleep I had, and how much awake time I had between the hours of midnight and 9 a.m.
So tell me about, your longest day. Was there a time in your life where things were rough and you were worried or
August 5th, 1964. It was a Tonkin Gulf incident. We were on the flight deck for 3 consecutive days. I slept on the wing of an airplane. My buddy Carl slept on 2 bomb skids pushed together. Uh, we were at general quarters for the whole period of time. When we ate, it was sea rations. We'd send somebody down to the supply room and they'd bring up a bag of sea rations for the guys in the shop. We didn't shower. We didn't change clothes. We didn't brush our teeth or shave. Uh, we were lucky if we could get off the flight deck long enough for a cup of coffee and a cigarette. The ordnance
so
we
what
had,
was going on?
it was the Tonkin Gulf incident when the Turner Joy and the Maddox were attacked by the Vietnamese PT boats up in the Tonkin Gulf. We were flying air support for the destroyers. And after the first mission, we found things in our airplanes that shouldn't have been there, holes they didn't have in them when they left. So we bolted the armor plate on the airplanes, which probably hadn't been on the airplanes since Korea. We started hanging napalm on the airplanes, and the napalm canisters were so old that some of them leaked. So we would cut the tops off of soda cans, empty soda cans, punch holes in them on the top and sides, and wire them to the bottom of the napalm canisters to get the leaks. And then every couple of hours, we would put new cans on the bombs and throw the old ones in the ocean.
Wow.
That was a fun 3 days.
So, so these this thing happened in the Gulf of Tonkin where apparently an American, and there's some dispute about what happened and what really happened, and
No,
whether there
no,
was a real attack or
no,
not.
no, there isn't. Um, Two separate incidents. The first
Okay.
incident was real, but when the PT boats came back out the second time, that wasn't real. That was apparently radar malfunctions on the destroyers because the airplanes we
Oh,
sky
okay.
didn't see anybody, but the ships were still painting them. But the first day, yeah, our airplanes got shot at. As
Oh,
a matter of fact,
wow.
one of our young lieutenants, junior grade, like first lieutenant, great kid, most loved officer in the squadron. I'd never heard him swear in my life, but he was on that mission. It was his airplane that had the bullet holes in it. And when he saw the bullet holes, I learned that he knew words that I had never heard before. so,
So
but
you knew
he passed away a
and
year or
talked
so
to the
ago.
guy
Well, yeah, I
that got
talked
shot
to him up
at.
until he died. Um,
Oh, wow.
he passed away a year or so ago. He's about 10 years older than me. Um, but I'm still in touch with his daughter on Facebook. I don't know, she's American Airlines stewardess or a United Airlines stewardess. He was a United Airlines pilot when he got out of the Navy.
Tell me who you're proud of. Was there a legacy or a protege, somebody that you took under your wing that really has done a great thing? You know, even and maybe not in the military, maybe afterward.
I had I left the Constellation in 1974. My senior enlisted man was supposed to be a Master Chief Gunner's mate, an E9. I had an E5 on his first enlistment. I was supposed to have 56 sailors. I had like 23 or 24. I hadn't
Wow.
seen that kid. His name was Steve Marino. I hadn't seen him since 1974. About 6 years ago, I was living in West Virginia. When I'd seen him, I lived in San Diego. Since then, I'd lived in Jacksonville, Florida, Virginia Beach, Pensacola, McHenry, Illinois, Lanham, Maryland. 6 years ago in West Virginia, I got a Christmas card from him. And he penned a note. I still have the card somewhere around here. He penned a note that said, "Thank you for all of your help and mentorship when I worked for you aboard USS Constellation." And he signed it, Steve Marino, CW04 USN retired. And that made my day. So then I started digging around. And I have had kids that worked for me, sailors that worked for me. Two of them retired as O4s. One reverted from O3 to E9. And six retired as CW04s. And I was so proud of those 9 sailors, and none of them, three of them were in the same command. The two lieutenant commanders and the lieutenant were all in the same ordnance shop, but the rest of them were pretty much spread out around the fleet. And they, in turn, have mentored other kids who have gone on. Then there's my son's friends, his grade school buddies. Those guys were as tight as ticks in junior high school. They're still as tight as ticks, and they're all in their late 50s. And they're spread out from North Carolina to Connecticut to Hawaii, Michigan, Virginia, and they still hook up on a regular basis. They're all surfers, and they get together Two of them went down and joined the third one on a surfing trip in Costa Rica. The one that lives in Hawaii is wanting a couple of them to fly out. They're both school faculty members. They want them to fly out to Hawaii in the summer and they can surf the big waves. And that's another group of kids that I really enjoyed. Matter of fact, one of the kids he and I are totally politically opposed. And we fight on Facebook on political stuff regularly. But when my Navy buddies get involved, I have to tell them to back off because I've known this kid since he was 7 years old. We've had these battles since he was 7 years old. He lived in my refrigerator for 4 years. When his dad got transferred to North Carolina, he was a Navy corpsman, served with the Marine Corps. Sonny stayed in Virginia Beach and moved in with my ex-wife and kids to finish his last year in high school. I mean, they were all great guys. And I miss seeing them a lot, too. They made me feel young.
All right, so we got to go back and we got to live one day again. What day is it going to be? Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And I'm going to be with you, and you're going to explain to me what's happening, okay?
January 16th, 1963.
Okay, what's happening?
I would not drop out of high school. I would stay that other year and a half and finish my high school.
Oh, wow. Okay. How about that? So you wouldn't have dropped out of high school and joined the Navy. You would have stayed.
I stayed another year and a half, got my diploma, and then joined the Navy.
Amen. Amen. Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Okay, you were an air defense artilleryman. That ain't rolling a cannonball down the muzzle of a 24-pounder and hitting it with a match. Okay? The Navy sent me to aviation ordnanceman, we call Class A school, basic ordnance training. I was from a small town. Everybody knew everybody. I had to get out of that environment. I didn't have to, but I wanted to get out of that environment. I was bored in high school on the educational side. So I go to this aviation ordnance school. It's a 3-month school. And during that 3 months, they force-fed me a college semester's worth of advanced mathematics, electricity, electronics, physics, calculus, trigonometry, hydraulics, explosives, and other stuff. Each of those got me 2 college credits when I applied to the junior college to get an associate's degree. If I'd known I was going to drop out of high school and join the Navy and spend a year in school, counting boot camp, I wouldn't have dropped out of school.
You thought you was getting out of it, huh?
Yep, I surely did. And
oh, wow.
That was back in the days when chief petty officers were chief petty officers. They were not E7s. Even though what we call the rocks and shoals were the old World War II articles of war had been replaced by the UCMJ, some of these World War II veteran chief petty officers didn't believe in the UCMJ. And they were like as not to pop you upside of the head if you screw up.
Well, one of the interesting things that I talk about, most of the folks that I talk about or talk to, they talk about these old Vietnam era folks. They're like, well, my legacy was a Vietnam. Well, you are a Vietnam era folk, and you're telling about World War II vets, people that like were worried about German U-boats and what's it?
I was an E6 in this helicopter gunship squadron. I worked for an E7 named Spike Payne, AOC Spike Payne. when the warrant officer list came out, Spike started teaching me what he felt an officer needed to know, not what the Naval Academy or the president felt the officer needed to know. But he only had 2 months to do it. At the end of that 2 months, I detached. I went to warrant officer school. Then I went to the Constellation. And I was aboard the Constellation about a month and a half, and Spike showed up to be my flight deck ordnance chief. And I said, "What the heck are you doing here, Spike?" And he says, "I wasn't done training you yet." And the best day in my life, when the kids were around, it was gunner this, gunner that, yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full. When it was just him and me in the shop, it was, "Hey, you, boy, come here." Best day of my life. I walked in the shop. He was sitting at his desk. I went over to the coffee pot, picked up my cup. I said, "Spike, you want a cup of coffee?" He says, "Yes, sir. Sit down, gunner. I'll get it." So I sat down and I says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, you're an officer now." I says, "I've been an officer for over a year." He says, "Just because Dick Nixon said you're an officer doesn't make it so. I'm saying you're an officer." And that was probably one of the best days of my career. And he was a Korean War vet and a Vietnam vet.
It's neat to have feedback from those that mentored you and acceptance of your new rank or your new whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's like becoming an adult, right? Getting promoted to the adult Sunday school class when you
Yeah.
actually grew up in the youth group kind of thing, you know?
Funny story about that. When I was being medevac from USS Constellation to the Subic Bay Naval Hospital in 1972, and flew into Da Nang on the ship's cargo plane. And my brother was in the Air Force, and he was going to fly out to the ship on that same plane and surprise me. And when I got off the plane, the surprise was on the other foot. So we talked for a bit, and I said, "Hey, I'm hungry. We got to go someplace for lunch." He said, "Well, let's go to Chow Hall." Now, Da Nang is an Air Force base. Cherry was in the Air Force. So we went to the Chow Hall and split in half, officers to the right, enlisted men to the left. And I told the kid, I said, "Sergeant's my kid brother. I want to eat in the enlisted side of the galley." And he said, "Yes, sir, go ahead." So went in there and I ate, got done. The Air Force calls a KP, we call a mess cook. Civilians call a busboy. He came over and I says, "Can you get your mess sergeant here? I'd like to speak to him." He said, "Yes, sir." So he goes and gets this sergeant of first class or staff sergeant, I forget which. And he says, "What's the problem, sir?" And I said, "No problem at all, Sergeant. This is the greatest meal I've had in a long time." I said, "What am I supposed to do with this tray and this silverware and this glass?" And he said, "Well, sir, you can carry it to the scullery like the enlisted men do. You chose to eat over on this side of the mess hall." I said, "Sergeant, I haven't been an officer long enough not to worry about carrying it to the scullery. But I'm being medevac with infectious hepatitis, and I don't know if you want my silverware and my plate and cup in your scullery." He had a history.
Oh, wow.
And then when I checked into the hospital, my buddy Carl had checked in 2 hours before I did. He had had a traumatic amputation while flying in a ASW aircraft. Lost the tip of his left middle finger. So we had 30 days in the hospital together. I wouldn't wish that on a hospital administrator. Pardon?
I said, "Ouch, losing the tip of your middle finger while you're flying." Or what? I mean, what did he like? Try to reach out and see if the propeller was real or something?
They had a sonobuoy hung up in a launcher. It was an anti-sub airplane, and he had to stick his hand in the launcher to free it. And while he had his hand in there, the what they call a tactical coordinator, was a junior officer. He fired the sonobuoy launcher, and Carl lost a piece of his finger. He brought it to sick bay with him. he pulled it out of his flight suit. He had like 4 foot of head bandage and a fingertip wrapped up in it, and asked the doctor if he could sew it back on. And the doctor looked at it and threw it in a bucket.
Oh no. Oh no. Oh my gosh. So as we begin to close out tonight and think about our time together, and I just want to tell you thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. We've tried to tell, kind of timeless stories about your time, and try to reminisce a little bit. And thank you so much for hanging out with me. It's been very enjoyable. Is there a story we haven't told yet? Maybe you could close out with, or any advice maybe you could give us as you think back on your time of service and love for our country as an American patriot.
Well, I'm not a big fan of the Department of Defense anymore, so I'd tell today's high school kids to join the Coast Guard. They get the same education as the Navy and the Air Force. They're the ones that are seeing the real action in the drug smuggling world, and they get to stay home a lot. I mean, guy from my hometown, my age, joined the Coast Guard as a teenager. Like I said, we were in Northern Illinois. His first duty station was on Lake Michigan, 40 miles from home. He was there for 3 years. So,
Amen.
do what you got to do. Whatever you do, don't screw it up. Do it as the best of your ability. College is great. Been there, done that. But it's not the be all and the end all. Trade schools are just as good as the college education, a lot less expensive. I've got a retired Coast Guard buddy of mine who was a master plumber, and he was making more money in Maryland as a plumber than my boss was as the executive director for Ambed. So, can't think of anything else, Will.
Well, thank you very much for hanging out with me. I've enjoyed it. It's been a blessing, and we're gonna get we'll get your coin and your box, and we have a titanium thumb drive we'll be sending to you. So I'll be asking you for your address and stuff, and all this.
Can you see that?
What is that?
That's my titanium thumb.
You got metal in there?
Yep. Titanium joint. On X-ray, it looks like a golf tee.
Oh wow, that's cool. That's cool. Well, I appreciate you spending some time with us, and we've enjoyed it so much. And we'll say good night, everybody.
Good night, y'all.